I've worked in the ER long enough to know that death doesn't always wait for the OR. Sometimes, no matter how fast you run, how quickly you get the IV, how tightly you press your palms on a wound, time wins. That night, it was a young trauma patient. 20-something, came in after a bad car wreck on the interstate. The kind where the car folds like paper and you wonder how anyone made it out alive. He was barely holding on when the paramedics wheeled him through the double doors. We did what we always do: airway, lines, fluids, pressure bags, shouting vitals across the room like a battle drill. We had him prepped for surgery, draped, IVs wide open, anesthesia waiting. But just as we were about to roll him upstairs, the monitor flatlined. Not even a warning, just a hard, steady tone that filled the room. We tried everything: compressions, meds, even a Lucas device, but he slipped away right there on the table. When the doctor finally called it, the room went so quiet you could hear the hum of the overhead lights. We all just froze for a second. That silence after a code is always heavy. Everyone packs up, resets, and moves on because the next trauma will hit soon enough. But part of you stays in that room. We cleaned him, zipped the body bag, called transport to take him down to the morgue. Another name on a chart. Another loss logged in the shift notes. By midnight, the chaos of the ER had swallowed the moment. Or so I thought. Hours later, I was sitting at the nurses' station, finishing charting. The halls were unusually quiet, no traumas rolling in. Just the low beeps of telemetry and the buzz of vending machines. That's when the desk phone rang. Now, that phone only rings for one of three reasons: a family update, a doctor calling in, or EMS giving us a heads up. It's never social, never casual. It's the kind of ring that makes you answer immediately, even at 3 a.m. I picked up. ER, this is RN Murphy. At first, there was just static. Then a voice, low and ragged, like someone forcing air through a broken throat. I'm still waiting for my turn. I froze. My first thought was a wrong number, but the tone, the rasp in that voice, it wasn't just eerie. It was familiar. My stomach dropped before my mind caught up. It sounded like him. The trauma patient. The one who died hours earlier. I glanced at the caller ID. The screen glowed with a single word: unknown. I tried to keep my voice steady. Sir, who is this? Nothing. Just a hiss of static. Then the line went dead. I sat there, receiver still in my hand, staring at the phone like it had just spoken in tongues. Another nurse across from me noticed. You okay? I didn't know what to say. How do you explain that you just heard a dead man's voice asking for his turn? I hit times 69 out of instinct. No callback number, just unavailable. For the rest of the shift, I couldn't shake it. I replayed his arrival, his last moments on the table, that final flatline. And then that voice, raspy, insistent, burned into my memory. I'm still waiting for my turn. What turn? His surgery? His chance to live? Or something none of us could give him? I stayed late that morning, long after my relief came in. I watched the transport staff wheel another covered gurney toward the elevator, headed down to the morgue. The wheels clicked against the tiles in a rhythm that sounded too much like that voice repeating itself. Waiting. Always waiting. Some nights I tell myself it was exhaustion, a prank call, my brain filling in gaps it shouldn't. But other nights, when the unit goes quiet and the phone rings, I hesitate before answering. Because I can't shake the thought. What if he's still down there, waiting for his turn to be heard? And what if the next call is for me? In the ER, we learn that not every call comes from the living. Some come from the ones we couldn't save, and sometimes they don't stop calling. I remember the first time it happened, clear as day. I'd just started my night shift in the ER, the kind of shift where the air feels heavy before you've even clocked in. The unit was full, Machines beeping. Stretchers lined up in the hallway. We'd been running codes all week, short on staff, and the weight of it all had started to blur one day into the next. There was this one patient, a woman in her 60s, maybe early 70s, who came in with severe chest pain. Her chart said, possible MI, a heart attack. She was calm, almost too calm, as we hooked her up to the monitors, started an IV, and drew labs. I still remember how she looked at me, almost like she knew something was coming. We worked her up, prepped her for cath lab, but her condition nosedived in minutes. The monitor went into VFib, alarms went off, and suddenly the room filled with the familiar chaos of a code. Chest compressions, meds pushed, defib pads slapped on. We fought for her, all of us did. But after 30 minutes, the attending gave that quiet nod, the one that says it's over. We all stepped back, catching our breath. The room was heavy with that silence that always follows a code, the kind where you hear your own heartbeat in your ears. I started cleaning up, disconnecting IV tubing, resetting the monitor, rolling the cart back into place. That's when it hit me. A strong, unmistakable perfume. Not the kind you'd find in the hospital gift shop. Not the faint kind you get when visitors come in with too much on. This was heavy, floral, almost sweet, like someone had just walked by me wearing it. But there was no one there. No family, no staff, no patients near enough. The woman who had just passed, she hadn't been wearing anything. Her gown smelled like antiseptic and sweat. And yet, there it was, hanging in the air, filling my nose until I almost coughed from how thick it was. I looked around, even asked one of the other nurses if she smelled it. She wrinkled her nose, shook her head, and kept charting. I thought maybe I was just tired, hallucinating smells. It had been a long night, after all. So I pushed it out of my mind, finished my tasks, and moved on. Weeks went by. New patients came, others left. The memory of that perfume stayed with me, but it faded into the blur of everything else we see. Until the night it happened again. Same room, different patient. A man, this time mid-40s. Massive trauma from a rollover accident. EMS had done everything they could, but he was bleeding out faster than we could transfuse. We had the rapid infuser running, blood bags lined up, anesthesia and surgery trying to stabilize him long enough to get upstairs. But just like the woman before him, his body gave up before we could. The monitor went flat, and after another long code, the doctor called time of death. And right then, before I even stepped back from the bed, that perfume filled the room again. Thick, heavy, cloying, the same exact scent. Sweet, floral, like someone had sprayed it just inches from my face. I froze, hands still in my gloves, staring at the patient's lifeless body. Around me, other staff moved on, charting, cleaning, resetting. I asked quietly, "Do you guys smell that?" But again, nobody did. I wasn't imagining it. I knew that smell. The first time I brushed it off. This time, I couldn't. It wasn't just in my nose, it felt like it was seeping into the room itself, claiming it, like a signature left behind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying both deaths, both moments, both times the perfume appeared. Two very different patients, weeks apart, but both in the same room, both followed by the same overwhelming scent. I started asking around, carefully, so I didn't sound crazy. A few of the older nurses just gave me that look, the one that says, "You're not the first to notice." One even told me, "Yeah, room 6 has something about it. You'll see." That was all she said. Now, every time I get assigned to that room, I feel my chest tighten. I check the vents. I sniff around the corners, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it's a cleaning product, maybe it's something in the air ducts. But it never shows up during normal shifts. Only when someone dies. Only when the room goes still. And the worst part? It doesn't just smell like perfume anymore. It feels like presence, like someone lingering, standing close, watching. I don't know who she was, the first woman, the one who passed before the perfume showed itself. I don't know if she wore that scent in life, if it was hers, if it somehow imprinted on the room. But every time I smell it, I know what it means. Someone's about to leave us, and they're not leaving alone. Sometimes, late at night when the halls go quiet, I'll walk past room 6 and catch just the faintest whiff of it. Sweet, floral, heavy, and I wonder if it's waiting again. And maybe, one day, it'll be waiting for me. I've worked enough night shifts in the ER to know that strange things happen when the clock hits 2 in the morning. By then, the waiting room has usually thinned out. The drunks have either sobered up or been admitted, and the whole place takes on this strange stillness, like the building itself is holding its breath. But nothing, and I mean nothing, rattled me more than what happened with that wheelchair. It was a Tuesday night, one of those long, dragging shifts where the hours crawl. I was at the nurse's station, sipping lukewarm coffee, charting on a patient who had just been transferred upstairs. Security monitors flickered in the corner of the desk, feeds from the ER hallways, the ambulance bay, the entrances. Normally we barely glance at them unless there's trouble, but sometimes, when the floor goes quiet, your eyes wander. That night, mine did. At exactly 2:03 a.m., I noticed movement on the monitor covering Hall B. A wheelchair, one of those standard hospital ones with black vinyl seats and chrome frames, was rolling slowly down the hall. At first, I thought, okay, maybe transport left someone there. Maybe a patient was being wheeled back and forth. But the seat was empty, completely empty. No one pushing it, no one walking nearby. Just the chair, gliding in a straight line like it had somewhere to be. I leaned closer to the screen, frowning. You can always tell when someone's pushing a wheelchair, the handles rock, the wheels jerk. But this chair, it moved like it was being guided by an invisible hand. Smooth, steady, silent. I told myself there had to be a logical reason. Maybe the floor wasn't level. Maybe someone gave it a push and it just kept going. But the cameras don't lie, no one was near it. And Hall B is flat. No incline, no slope. Just tile and fluorescent lights stretching from one end to the other. The chair rolled all the way down the hall, straight toward the doors at the far end. Then, just as it slowed, both back wheels locked. You could actually see the stoppers snap into place on the footage. The chair rocked once, then went completely still. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. I called out to one of the other nurses, "Hey, come look at this." She walked over, and when she saw the screen, her face went pale. "Who's pushing that?" she whispered. "No one," I said, and I meant it. We rewound the tape 3 times, watched it frame by frame, empty every single time. We even sent security down the hall to check. They found the wheelchair exactly where the footage said it had stopped, brakes engaged tight. The hallway was empty. Word spread. Quick nurses, techs, even the doctors came by to see the tape. Some laughed it off, said it was a draft from the vents, air pressure from the automatic doors. But no one could explain how the brakes engaged on their own. Wheelchair locks aren't light. You have to push them down hard. Machines don't just do that. And here's the part that still gets me. That hallway? It leads straight past Trauma 2, the room where, earlier that night, we'd lost a patient. A man in his 50s, massive heart attack. We coded him for nearly an hour before the doctor called it. When the wheelchair rolled past, it stopped right outside Trauma 2's door, like it knew where to go. For the rest of that shift, none of us wanted to walk that hallway alone. Every creak of the floor, every squeak of a wheel made us look over our shoulders. When transport staff came down to grab that chair, they had to drag it. The brakes wouldn't budge at first, almost like something wanted it to stay put. To this day, Some of us swear that the man we lost in Trauma 2 wasn't ready to leave. Maybe he was looking for a way out. Maybe that chair was meant for him. I've seen death in every form, violent, sudden, quiet, expected. But that night made me wonder. What if some patients don't walk away when their hearts stop? What if they wait? And what if, when the hospital gets quiet enough, they find their own ride? Now, every time I see an empty wheelchair in the hall at night, I check twice. Once to make sure it's locked, and once to make sure it's really empty. Because in this place, sometimes the wheels keep moving, even when no one's there to push. I've seen monitors flatline more times than I care to remember. In the ER, it's part of the job code's end, death is pronounced, and the machines go quiet. That silence is final, absolute. But one night, I learned that sometimes the machines don't know when to stop. It was a late shift, just past midnight. We had a patient in his late 60s, cardiac arrest, brought in by EMS. The paramedics had worked him hard, compressions, shocks, meds, before we even got him through the doors. When we took over, it was the same routine. Chest compressions pounding, epinephrine every few minutes, defibrillator pads ready at hand. His wife sat outside the trauma bay, hands clasped together so tight her knuckles turned white. We gave him everything we had, but after 40 minutes, his heart wouldn't come back. The doctor checked the monitor, listened with his stethoscope, and finally called it. Time of death, 12:47 a.m. The team stood still for just a beat. That pause always feels longer than it is, like the room itself is waiting. Then we did what we always do, we cleaned up. Tubes came out, IVs were pulled, equipment reset for the next patient. The monitor still displayed its flat green line, no rhythm, no life. Just the steady, unbroken signal of death. Except it didn't stay that way. As I was wiping down the bedside table, I heard it. A faint beep. Not the loud, frantic tone of a code blue, but a single, quiet pulse. I turned to the monitor. On the screen, tiny blips had appeared. Faint little humps spaced out like a weak heartbeat. My first reaction was denial. Maybe the leads weren't removed properly. Maybe there was artifact, interference, static. But the leads were off. The man was gone. I checked the patient myself. No pulse, no breathing, no movement. He was cold. And yet, the monitor beeped again and again. Slow, deliberate, steady, like someone's heart trying to push through from the other side. I felt a tightness in my chest. One of the other nurses noticed it too. "Why is it still showing rhythm?" she asked, her voice lower than usual. The doctor frowned, stepped over, and tapped the screen. "Must be electrical interference. Just unplug it." So I did. I pulled the plug from the wall. The screen flickered, but instead of going dark, the line kept running. The blips kept coming. The beeps didn't stop. We all froze. Machines don't do that, not unless they're still connected to power. But this one wouldn't shut up. The doctor shook his head and muttered something about the machine being faulty, but I could see it in his face. He didn't believe his own words. Finally, one of the techs said, "Let's just wheel it out." So we unlocked the monitor from the stand and pushed it into the hallway. The second it crossed the threshold of that trauma bay door, the monitor went dead. Screen black, beeping gone, just silence. We stood there staring, the machine parked against the wall like nothing had happened. No one spoke for a long time. Then the doctor cleared his throat, told us to get back to work, and that was that. But I couldn't shake it. Why did the monitor only stop when it left the room? Why did it act like something was tethered to that space, to that body, refusing to let go? Later, when I walked past the monitor sitting in the hall, I put my hand on it. Cold, metal, dead screen. Normal. But I couldn't stop myself from glancing into the trauma bay. half expecting to see him still lying there, heart struggling to make itself known. In this job, you come to accept that machines are just tools. They measure, record, display. But that night taught me something else sometimes. They bear witness. Sometimes, they pick up things that we can't explain. And sometimes, they don't stop beeping until whatever's left finally decides it's time to let go. I still think about that patient's wife, sitting outside the door, clutching her hands, waiting for news she already knew in her gut. If she had heard that monitor, if she had walked in and seen the line jumping again, what would she have thought? That her husband was still in there? Still trying? Or that some part of him refused to leave until we pushed the machine out with him? Now, every time I hear a monitor beep after death has been called, I don't just hear noise. I listen. I wonder. Because maybe the machines know something we don't. And maybe, just maybe, death isn't as silent as we think. I've been in the ER long enough to know the difference between what exhaustion makes you imagine and what really happens in that room. But there are some nights I can't explain, no matter how many times I go over it in my head. The night of the familiar voice is one of them. It was a Friday shift, busy as always. Fridays never let you breathe. Ambulances line up at the bay. The waiting room spills over with coughs and broken bones. And inside the trauma rooms, it feels like a war zone. That night, we had a cardiac arrest come in middle-aged man, collapsed at home. EMS had been working him for 15 minutes before they brought him through our double doors. The second the stretcher rolled in, we were on autopilot. Compressions started, IV access established, epinephrine given. Defib pads slapped onto his chest, shocks delivered in sharp bursts of light and sound. The room filled with voices, nurses calling out doses, techs shouting vitals, the attending doctor directing every move. It's a rhythm we all fall into, like a grim orchestra where everyone knows their part. I was at the head of the bed, bagging the patient, sweat running down my back. His body jerked with each shock, but the monitor stayed stubbornly flat. Time blurred. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Still no pulse. His skin was growing waxy, lips blue, and you could feel the unspoken thought starting to hang in the air. Maybe this is it. And then it happened. In the middle of the chaos, as another nurse pushed meds and someone else counted compressions, a voice rang out. Deep, commanding, forceful in a way that cut through every sound in the room. "Keep trying!" The words hit like a slap. All of us froze for half a second, hands suspended mid-task, eyes flicking toward the door. Because the thing was, none of us had said it, and it hadn't come from the attending. He was on my left, bent over the patient, not even speaking in that moment. But we all heard it, every single one of us. It wasn't muffled, it wasn't distant, it was clear, loud. Like someone had been standing right inside the room with us, demanding we push harder. The silence after was worse than the noise. For just a moment, the whole room held its breath. Then the attending shook it off, barked, "Resume compressions!" And we fell back into rhythm, more forceful than before. We worked another 10 minutes, but the patient never came back. Finally, the attending called it. Time of death. The room went still. The adrenaline drained out of us, and the weight of that voice pressed in heavier than the loss itself. As we cleaned up, I caught one of the newer nurses staring at the door, pale as a sheet. Later, when the room was empty and the body had been taken down to the morgue, she pulled me aside. "You heard it, right?" she whispered. I nodded. We all did. Her eyes filled with tears. "That voice. I know that voice." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard. It sounded exactly like Dr. Morgan. The name sent a chill through me. Everyone in our ER knew that story. Doctor. William Morgan had been one of the best ER physicians we'd ever had. Tough, uncompromising, but always fighting tooth and nail for his patients. Years back, he'd dropped dead of a heart attack. Right here in this same ER. Some said it was ironic, others said it was cruel, but nobody forgot him. I stared at her, goosebumps crawling my arms. She was right. I hadn't thought about it in the moment, but when she said his name, the memory clicked. The voice booming, deep, urgent, it did sound like him. Exactly like him. That night, I went home but couldn't sleep. I kept hearing those two words, echoing in my head. Keep trying. And I thought about how it made us push longer, harder, refusing to give up, even when the odds were gone. Sometimes I wonder if that's what it was. Maybe it was exhaustion, a collective hallucination born of stress and adrenaline. Maybe one of us unconsciously said it, and our minds twisted it into something else. But deep down, I don't believe that. Because it didn't sound like one of us. It sounded like him. And maybe, just maybe, he never really left. Maybe some part of him still lingers in that ER, still watching over the room where he fought so many battles, still demanding that we give everything we have, even when the fight is already lost. Now, whenever I hear a voice push through the chaos of a code, I listen carefully. And sometimes, when it's late and the halls are quiet, I swear I can still hear him whispering from the corner of the trauma bay. Keep trying. And I do. Even when hope is gone, even when the odds are stacked against us, I keep trying. Because maybe that's the only legacy that matters. I've worked in the ER long enough to know that the body doesn't always go quietly. There are reflexes, twitches, gasps, the kind of movements that can rattle even seasoned staff if you don't understand them. But nothing prepared me for the night. A dead patient sat straight up in front of us. It was close to 3 a.m., the time when exhaustion sets in and the halls go quiet except for the hum of monitors and the occasional ring of the desk phone. We'd lost a patient in Trauma 3, a man in his late 50s, cardiac arrest. EMS had worked him hard on the way in, and we picked up the fight when they rolled him through the doors. Compressions, epi, shocks, we gave him everything we had. But after nearly an hour, his heart gave up. The doctor checked, listened, and finally gave that quiet, heavy call, time of death. His wife had already gone home earlier, too distraught to stay. So once the paperwork was signed, it was just us, the nurses and techs, left to prepare him for transport to the morgue. It's a routine part of the job, one most people don't think about. We straighten the body, remove the lines, clean what we can, and zip the bag. It's about dignity, about making sure they leave the ER as a person, not just a case number. That night, I was standing at the bedside, gloving up, when it happened. One of the techs was pulling the monitor leads off his chest. Another was loosening the straps to shift him onto the gurney. I was reaching for the body bag when, without warning, the man sat up. Not a twitch, not a jerk. He sat straight up, his torso rising from the bed like someone had pulled invisible strings. His head rolled forward, his eyes snapped open, and for one horrifying second, he looked right at us. The entire room froze. No one moved, no one breathed. I felt my heart slam against my ribs so hard it hurt. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't work. The tech nearest him let out a sound, half scream, half gasp, and stumbled backward into the wall. Another nurse dropped her gloves, hands shaking, eyes wide as saucers. I swear to God, for that second, it looked like he was alive again. His chest didn't rise. There was no pulse, no breath. But his eyes were open, glassy, fixed in a stare that seemed to cut through all of us. And then, just as suddenly, his body collapsed. He fell back against the bed with a heavy thud, eyes rolling shut, lifeless once more. The room stayed dead silent, the air thick with the weight of what we'd just seen. Someone finally whispered, "What the hell was that?" but nobody had an answer. We stood there, stunned, until the doctor stepped back into the room. He saw us pale and frozen, saw the patient flat on the bed, and raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" None of us spoke. How do you explain that the dead man just sat up, that his eyes opened like he wasn't done leaving this world? We finished prepping him in silence. Every zip of the bag felt louder than it should have. No one cracked a joke. No one tried to brush it off. The air was too heavy, too wrong. Later, in the break room, one of the older nurses finally spoke. She said she'd seen something like it once before, called it the Lazarus reflex. Sometimes, after death, the body releases a surge of energy, causing sudden movement. It's rare, but it happens. At least, that's the explanation she gave. But here's the thing. I've seen post-mortem twitches. I've seen hands curl, jaws slacken, even bodies release one last gasp of air. None of that looks like what we saw. None of that explains the way he sat up straight, eyes open, staring right at us like he wasn't done yet. Even now, years later, I can still see it in my mind, the way his body rose, the way his eyes seemed to lock onto mine, the way time itself seemed to freeze in that room. I tell myself it was a reflex. I tell myself it was just the body doing strange things as it shut down. But deep down, a part of me wonders if it was something else. Maybe the body really does fight to hang on. Maybe the spirit lingers for one last look before it goes. Or maybe, just maybe, the dead don't always leave as quietly as we think. All I know is that every time I prep a body now, I can't help but wait for that moment, for the chest to rise, the eyes to snap open, the body to move. Because once you've seen a dead man sit up and look you in the eye, you never forget it. And you never trust silence in the ER the same way again. I'll never forget the night we lost a patient on the med-surg floor and had to transport him down to the morgue. I wasn't the primary nurse on his case, but I helped with the post-mortem prep and was there when transport came to take him. It was one of those nights where everything felt stretched thin, staff running in 3 different directions, phones ringing, patients pressing call buttons non-stop. Death always seems to come at the worst possible time. The man had passed quietly, his body already cooling under the white sheet by the time we transferred him onto the gurney. The transport techs clipped the straps, zipped the bag, and began wheeling him down the hall. I stayed behind for a moment, charting, before deciding to ride the elevator down with them. Something about nights like that, quiet, heavy, I just didn't feel right letting them go alone. We wheeled the gurney into the staff elevator. Normally, it goes straight to the basement, where the morgue sits, at the end of a long, dim corridor. But that night, for reasons I still can't explain, the elevator stopped on the psych ward. The bell dinged, the doors slid open, and what I saw still makes my stomach turn. The gurney was empty. Just seconds before, the covered body had been strapped down tight. The weight of it was there, pressing on the wheels as we pushed him inside. But now, nothing. The sheet was flat, the straps buckled across an empty stretcher. The transport tech swore under his breath and stepped back like he'd just been burned. I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. We all leaned in, looking, expecting maybe the sheet had slipped, maybe we were missing something. But no. The body was gone. The psych ward staff at the desk looked over at us, confused. "You guys okay?" one asked. We didn't answer. How do you explain that a body just vanished from a locked gurney inside an elevator? The doors slid closed again, and we just stood there in stunned silence as the elevator descended the rest of the way down. When it reached the basement and the doors opened, my legs nearly gave out, because there he was. The gurney rolled out as if nothing had happened. The body zipped up and strapped down, exactly how it had been minutes before. No one had touched it. No one could have. The transport tech muttered, "Hell no," and crossed himself. I just stood there, frozen. the back of my neck prickling. We wheeled him the rest of the way into the morgue without a word, and when the door shut behind us, the silence pressed so heavy it felt like the walls were listening. For the rest of that shift, none of us spoke about it out loud, but you could see it in our faces, the unease, the disbelief. We all knew we'd witnessed something we couldn't explain. Later, one of the older psych nurses pulled me aside. She told me that years back, a patient on the ward had hung himself and wasn't found until morning. They say he was supposed to be transported straight to the morgue, but somewhere in between floors, the elevator malfunctioned. When the doors opened, the gurney was empty, just like what we saw. The story goes that he never really left, that he still lingers on that ward, waiting for company. I don't know if I believe all of that, but I do know what I saw. I know how my hands shook as I pushed that gurney into the morgue. I know the sick drop in my stomach when I realized the body had reappeared like nothing happened. Now, whenever I take that elevator on nights I'm working, I can't help but glance at the floor numbers as they light up. And if it ever stops on the psych ward, I hold my breath until the doors close again. Because I keep thinking, what if the next time, it's me that disappears inside? I've seen plenty of strange things working in the ER, but paperwork doesn't usually make the list. Charts don't walk off on their own. They don't vanish, and they sure as hell don't reappear in places no one should have put them. That's why the night of the vanishing chart still gives me chills every time I think about it. It was a slow night, the kind that lulls you into thinking maybe you'll catch a break. Around midnight, we got a call from the floor upstairs. A patient had coded, and despite a long resuscitation attempt, he hadn't made it. His body was being brought down for us to prepare before transport to the morgue. I wasn't his primary nurse, but I helped with the process, removing the lines, making sure he was presentable, logging the time of death. I had his chart in my hands as I walked back to the desk. It was thick, stuffed with pages of labs, orders, and notes from his long stay. I set it down on the counter, right next to the computer, and turned away to grab supplies. When I came back, maybe 5 minutes later, it was gone. At first, I thought one of the residents had grabbed it, or maybe another nurse had needed to check something. But when I asked around, no one had touched it. Not the residents, not the charge nurse, not the techs. Everyone just looked at me like I'd lost it. I tore the desk apart, checked under the keyboards, flipped through stacks of other charts, even opened drawers I never touch. Nothing. The chart had vanished as if it had never been there. The charge nurse told me to just start a missing chart form, but I couldn't shake the unease. Losing a chart isn't like misplacing a pen. Charts are legal documents, part of the record. They don't just disappear. I filed the report, went home after my shift, and tried to forget it. Weeks passed. Then one night, I was down in the morgue helping transport another body. The freezer room is always colder than you think. It'll be your breath hangs in the air, and the metal drawers line the walls like silent filing cabinets. The tech slid open one of the drawers, and I froze. Because there it was, the missing chart. Neatly placed on top of a body bag. The same patient's name on the label. The same man whose chart had disappeared weeks before. The nurse beside me gasped. I just stared, my heart pounding. The chart wasn't crumpled or damaged. It wasn't like someone had dropped it down there by mistake. It was laid out flat, centered, as if it had been intentionally placed. I reached out slowly, picked it up, and flipped through the pages. It was all there. Labs, notes, signatures. Exactly as I'd left it the night it vanished. The morgue tech frowned, said, "That's not supposed to be here." No kidding. Charts are never stored with bodies, ever. That's not policy. That's not practice. I brought it back upstairs, but the unease clung to me like frost. None of it made sense. How does a chart vanish from a busy desk in a well-lit ER, only to reappear weeks later in the morgue freezer, sitting with the same patient it belonged to? Some of the older nurses said they weren't surprised. They claimed charts, call lights, even entire supply carts had a way of moving on their own after a death. "The dead don't like loose ends," one of them said with a shrug. But it didn't feel like a joke. For me, that night changed something. Every time I set a chart down now, I keep one eye on it. Every time I walk into the morgue, I half expect to see paperwork waiting, placed neatly where it doesn't belong. Because if a chart can vanish from my hands and reappear with the dead, maybe it wasn't paperwork that moved it at all. Maybe it was the patient, reaching back for the last piece of themselves. And maybe some records don't belong in the files upstairs. Maybe they belong exactly where they ended in the cold silence of the morgue. I've been in the ER long enough to know that some shifts leave marks on you, the kind that don't fade, no matter how many years go by. We see things people shouldn't have to see, and we learn to compartmentalize to shove it all into some locked drawer in the back of our minds so we can keep doing our jobs. But there are nights that defy explanation. Nights where no drawer is big enough to hold what you've just lived through. For me, the night of the reappearing patient is one of those. It started on a Saturday. Weekends are always rough, more violence, more accidents, more chaos. That night, EMS rolled in fast, pushing a gurney with a man on it. He was in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, wearing a torn white t-shirt and jeans. His shirt was soaked in blood, and when they shifted the fabric, I saw the wound, a gunshot to the chest, center mass. We went into code mode instantly. Trauma room lit up, gloves snapped, meds drawn. I jumped in at the head of the bed, bagging him as compressions started. The doc called for chest tubes, epi, blood units, every move precise, every voice sharp. It's the kind of chaos that feels like music when you've done it long enough. But no matter what we tried, he slipped further away. We transfused unit after unit, cracked his chest, tried to control the bleeding, but it was like fighting against a waterfall. His eyes went glassy, and after nearly an hour of desperate work, the attending gave the call. Time of death. We all stepped back, drenched in sweat and silence. I remember staring at his clothes, torn t-shirt, dark jeans, scuffed boots, trying to push the image into that mental drawer where we keep our ghosts. His body was zipped into a bag, tagged, and wheeled down to the morgue. Paperwork signed, case logged, end of story. Or at least, it should have been. 2 nights later, I was back on shift. Around 1 a.m., the radio crackled. Incoming trauma, GSW to the chest. We rolled our eyes, grabbed supplies, and prepped trauma 2. Then the doors banged open and EMS pushed in. And my blood ran cold. It was him. Same man. Same torn white t-shirt, same jeans, same boots, same wound, bleeding through the exact same spot. He groaned as they transferred him to our stretcher, blood bubbling from his mouth. I froze, my body refusing to move. My brain scrambled for answers. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe it was someone who just looked like him. But no. The scar on his left eyebrow, the tattoo on his forearm, it was all there. Identical. Another nurse beside me whispered, "That's impossible." She'd been there the night he died. She'd zipped the bag herself. But there he was, alive or something like it on our stretcher again. We worked him just like before. Compressions, intubation, transfusions. The attending's voice cut through the chaos, ordering meds, calling for instruments. But under it all, I felt a creeping dread. Like we weren't saving him, we were reenacting something that had already played out. And then, just like before, he died. Same wound, same frantic efforts, same slow slide into nothing. Time of death was called at nearly the exact same minute as 2 nights earlier. The room went silent. No one spoke. We just stood there staring at him like if we blinked, he'd vanish. Afterward, one of the residents, pale as chalk, picked up the phone and called the police. They confirmed what we already knew but couldn't process. The first body was still in the morgue. Still sealed, still logged, still there. So who or what had we just worked on? That night, I went home and sat in the dark, trying to make sense of it. I thought maybe it was a twin, but there was no mention of one in his file. Maybe some clerical error. Maybe my mind filling gaps under stress. But I wasn't the only one who saw him. Half a dozen staff members were there. We all saw the same man, the same wound, the same clothes. The image of him still haunts me. Not because of the blood, not because of the violence, but because of the way his eyes looked the second time, as if he knew what was coming. As if he'd already lived it once and was resigned to repeat it. I don't know what we treated that night. A ghost? A replay of a moment so violent it left a scar on time itself? All I know is that it wasn't just a man with a wound. It was something else. Something that didn't belong in the living world. Now, whenever I hear a trauma call, I brace myself. Because sometimes, the dead don't stay where we put them. Sometimes, they find their way back through the ER doors, bleeding, begging, and forcing us to relive the night we already lost them. And if it happened once, it could happen again. Nights in the ER have their own rhythm. By 3 in the morning, the chaos usually dies down. The waiting room empties, the hall lights dim a little, and the whole place feels suspended between exhaustion and silence. That's when the smallest sounds carry the shuffle of shoes, the hiss of oxygen, the beep of a monitor, and sometimes it's when you hear things you know shouldn't be there. I was on nights that week, covering a mix of adult and pediatric cases. I'd been in the ER long enough that nothing really surprised me anymore. Drunks, stabbings, asthma attacks, overdoses. But that night, around 3 a.m., the charge nurse asked me to check Bay 4. She said one of the techs thought she heard a kid crying. I laughed it off at first. Bay 4 had been empty all night, cleaned and stocked hours earlier. Still, I walked down the hall, my sneakers squeaking softly against the tile. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting everything in that pale yellow glow hospitals seem to keep at night. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. The air around Bay 4 seemed heavier, like it pressed down on my shoulders. I stepped into the doorway and froze. It was faint, but clear. The sound of a child crying. Not wailing, not throwing a tantrum, just soft, broken sobs, like a little boy or girl too tired to keep going but too scared to stop. My heart jumped into my throat. I scanned the room. The stretcher was stripped bare, cabinets closed, monitors off, empty. Absolutely empty. And yet, the crying continued, echoing off the walls in that sterile little space. I whispered, "Hello?" before I could stop myself. My voice sounded ridiculous, shaky. Of course, no one answered. The crying just went on, rising for a few seconds, then tapering off into quiet whimpers. I backed out of the bay and nearly ran into another nurse. Her face was pale. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded. Neither of us said another word. We just stood there in the hall, listening. The crying was still faintly audible, drifting out of the empty room. That was the moment the charge nurse came over. She looked between us, frowned, and then sighed like she'd been expecting this. "Bay 4, she muttered. "Figures." When I asked what she meant, she hesitated. Then she told me the story. Years ago, long before I started there, Bay 4 had been used for pediatric crash cases. One night, a 5-year-old boy came in after a drowning. EMS had worked on him the whole ride in, and the team in the ER fought just as hard once he arrived. They intubated him, pushed meds, shocked him again and again. His parents were outside the doors, screaming, begging. But after 45 minutes, the attending called time of death. The boy never made it out of Bay 4. Since then, she said, every so often staff reported the same thing. Crying. Always around 3 in the morning. Always in that same bay. Some swore they saw shadows flicker against the curtain. Others said they felt tiny, cold hands brush theirs as they reached for supplies. I wanted to dismiss it, chalk it up to stress, to the mind playing tricks when you're tired. But that night, it wasn't just me. It was me, the tech, and another nurse. We all heard it. The sound of a child crying in a room that was supposed to be empty. We didn't call security. We didn't check the vents. We didn't even try to rationalize it. We just closed the bay curtain and left the lights off. Like maybe if we didn't disturb it, it would fade. By morning, the crying was gone. The day shift walked in like nothing had happened, and the ER roared back to life with new traumas, new codes, new chaos. But I'll never forget that sound. The way it dug under my skin. The way it made the hair on my arms stand straight up. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't exhaustion. It was too real, too raw. And the worst part? There was something in that cry, something that wasn't just fear. It was sorrow. Pure, endless sorrow. Like a little boy who didn't understand why no one could save him. Now, whenever I walk past Bay 4 during a night shift, I can't help but slow down, listening. Most nights, there's nothing. Just silence and the hum of machines. But every once in a while, if the clock reads close to 3 a.m., I swear I catch it again. Soft, muffled sobs, rising and falling in the stillness. And when I do, I don't go in. I just keep walking. Because some pain never leaves. Some cries echo forever. I've worked in the ER long enough to know that the line between life and death is thin paper thin. Sometimes you're holding it in your hands, pressing down on a wound, bagging a patient, shocking a flatline, trying to keep someone tethered to the living world. And sometimes, it feels like they're the ones holding on to you. That night, I swear I felt it more than I ever had before. It was a Tuesday shift, sometime after midnight, when EMS brought him in. Middle-aged man, maybe late 50s, found unresponsive at home. They'd gotten a pulse back en route, but he never woke up. His skin was clammy, his breathing shallow, the kind of presentation that screams, "We're running out of time." We rolled him into Trauma 3, hooked him up to the monitor, got IVs going, and started labs. The room was filled with the usual buzz of a code, not chaos exactly, but a focused, clipped urgency. The doctor ordered meds, respiratory got him intubated, and once the immediate storm calmed, it fell on us nurses to keep the steady rhythm of care going, checking vitals, monitoring drips, recording every number. I was at his bedside, leaning close to place the blood pressure cuff around his arm. The room was quieter then, just the hum of machines, the shuffle of staff outside the curtain, the hiss of the vent. That's when I heard it. A voice. Low. Urgent. Just inches from my ear. "Don't let me go." I jerked upright, heart slamming in my chest. My eyes shot to the doorway, to the other side of the bed, to every corner of that room. But no one was there. The tech was across the hall. The doctor had stepped out to call the family. I was alone with the patient. The words rang in my head, so clear, so close. I actually touched my ear like I'd feel breath there. Nothing. Just the sterile stillness of the trauma bay. I looked down at him. He was still unconscious. No movement, no flutter of eyelids, nothing to suggest he'd spoken. The ventilator pushed air into his lungs in steady mechanical sighs. He wasn't aware, wasn't present. And yet, those words clung to me. I tried to shake it off, forced myself to finish the vitals, but I couldn't keep my hands from trembling. Every time the monitor beeped, it sounded like a reminder, "Don't let me go." For the rest of the shift, I kept glancing at him, waiting for another sound, another sign. None came. He stayed the same, silent, motionless. By morning, his blood pressure was slipping despite everything we tried. We maxed out his drips, adjusted the vent, pushed every med we could, but nothing worked. By sunrise, he was gone. The doctor called time of death, and just like that, the fight was over. The machines went still, the lines flat, and the room filled with that heavy silence that always follows. But the words didn't leave. For weeks afterward, they replayed in my head. I'd be at home, trying to sleep, and I'd hear them again, soft, desperate. Don't let me go. I'd be in the middle of a different code, and the memory would slam into me, as if he were still whispering in my ear, begging me to hold on tighter, to keep him tethered a little longer. I told myself it was exhaustion, that my brain had filled in a sound from the hum of the vent, the hiss of oxygen. That stress and lack of sleep had played a trick. But deep down, I don't buy that. It wasn't vague, it wasn't distorted, it was clear, like someone standing right beside me. Sometimes I wonder if, in that space between life and death, patients are more aware than we think. Maybe they can't open their eyes, can't move their mouths, but some part of them is still reaching out, desperate not to slip away. Maybe we catch those moments just barely, if we're standing close enough, if we're listening. Even now, years later, I can still hear him. The voice wasn't angry, wasn't loud. It was pleading, human, like the sound of someone on the edge of a cliff, fingers slipping, begging for one more second of grip. He didn't regain consciousness. We never got to save him. But I'll never forget that moment. Never forget how it felt like he passed something into me with those words. And sometimes, when I'm alone in a trauma bay late at night, leaning close to a patient clinging to life, I swear I feel that same presence again. A whisper just behind my ear. Don't let me go. And I promise, every single time, I try not to. Hi. I just want to take a moment to thank every single one of you for being here. Your support means more than words can ever express. Every view, every like, every comment, it all helps keep this channel alive and growing. If you've enjoyed these stories, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really makes a huge difference. I'd also love to hear from you. Share your own experiences in the comment section, and let me know where you're watching from. Hearing your stories and seeing the places you all come from is one of the best parts of this community. Thank you again for being part of this journey with me.